what we've got to publish. And so
I'll just let everyone get their tea and sit down, but we're about to start.
This is what you had 100 years ago, only their own interest.
Right, good morning everyone. Welcome to this BIC Breakfast, which is entitled UK Legal Deposit and Digital Publishing, Progress to Date and Next Steps. Thank you all very much for coming. I'd firstly like to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you to our sponsor and host for today, the British Library, obviously. And also to say a huge thank you to our two fantastic speakers, Huw Alexander from Sage Publishing and Linda Arnold-Stratford, from the British Library. Before I kick the BIC Breakfast off properly, it would be nice if everyone else in the room could just introduce themselves so everyone knows who everyone else is. Frances, do you mind if I start with you?
Hello, I'm Frances Dillon. I'm Publishing System Analyst at HarperCollins. Perfect, good enough.
Thank you.
I'm Huw Alexander. I'm Digital Sales Manager at Sage, and I'm talking about legal deposit this morning, apparently.
Good morning, I'm Leslie White. I'm the Managing Director of BDS.
I'm Neil Wilson. I'm Head of Production Metadata here at the British Library.
As I was saying, I'm Head of Data at Favour.
I'm Jessica Lyman. I'm Publisher at Cambridge Coalitions, which is part of Cambridge Press.
I'm David Martin. I'm the Senior Consultant at Advocate.
I'm Andy Davis. I'm Publisher Relations for Legal Deposit at the British Library.
I'm Paul Hayes. I'm the Application Development Manager for Booksonics.
I'm Dave Lyman. I'm the Director of Booksonics.
I'm Alice Ball. I'm the Head of Collection Management here at the British Library.
I'm Ingrid Harold, and I'm the Digital Data and Supply Chain Manager at DK.
Matteo Cocco, Digital Publishing, Safety Development.
Graham Bell, Executive Director of Editor.
I'm Nick Woods from the International ISBN Agency.
And I'm Linda Arnold-Stratford, Legal Deposit Libraries Liaison Manager.
And I'm Elaine Marie Bassett, I should have said, Business Manager from BIC. Right, so what is a BIC Breakfast? BIC Breakfasts are small, informal gatherings that focus on a particular issue or a particular topic within the book industry. They're set up for you to find out as much as you possibly can in a short period of time about that topic, and to put any questions that you have about that topic to professionals in that field. So please do make sure that if you have any questions, you do put them to our speakers. I hope they're very much prepared. I did forewarn you about this. If your questions aren't too burning, then do feel free to save them up. There is a Q&A session at the end, but if you do want to interrupt our speakers, I hope I'm right in saying they won't mind too much. So now just for a little bit about BIC. BIC stands for Book Industry Communication. We're the book industry supply chain organisation, and we're charged with ensuring that the supply chain runs as smoothly as possible through the use of best practice and the application of industry approved standards. We have a number of committees that help us do the work that we do. As you can see, we have a digital supply chain, a libraries, a metadata, a physical supply chain, and a training events and communications committee. And we have a number of task and finish working groups and clinics that work within those particular committees. We also hold regular events aimed at educating the industry at large. Obviously, BIC Breakfasts are a monthly event, and you're currently at one. We hold a number of networking events. Just to mention that the BIC Bash is coming up very shortly on the 15th of November. It's always a really fun event to be at. So if anyone here is from a BIC member organisation, please do sign up. It is a great laugh, and it's nice just to meet everyone within BIC member organisations and just be able to talk to them and see what they're all about. We also hold a Building a Better Business seminar at London Book Fair every year. That will be taking place in March next year. and we hold a new trends in publishing seminar every September rather. We're on the web, as you would imagine, on all the social media platforms you would expect, so please do feel free to connect with us in any way. We also have a new website, hopefully coming in early 2017. We'll keep you posted about that. And we have an extensive training programme. I've left leaflets in all of your packs, so please, if you have any questions about that, do come and talk to me at the end of this. I am the person that deals with training, so I am the right person to speak to. Now I'll pass you over to Linda.
Okay, thank you. I think I need the clicker.
You may. It's the arrows on the side.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right. Okay. So, hello. So my name's Linda Arnold-Stratford, and I don't actually work for the British Library. I work for all 6 legal deposit libraries. So that is the Bodleian, the British Library, Trinity College Dublin, which is probably a surprise to lots of you, National Library of Wales, National Library of Scotland, and Cambridge University Library. So I work with all of them and travel between all the sites. I happen to be based up in Boston Spa because it's God's own county, and who would not choose to live up there? My background is actually from publishing. So after completing my PhD, I went to work in medical publishing for the next 10 years and then went to work for the British Library. So in my role as Legal Deposit Libraries Liaison Manager, I have that ability to mix academia and national libraries and work with publishing. And my role is actually talking to government, liaising between publishers and the libraries, and particularly liaising between all 6 libraries to make sure that the non-print legal deposit regulations are implemented as they should be. Any of you who have been aware of the non-print legal deposit legislation and how long it's been around, you'll know that back in 2012, when we started talking about this, the concern was about the material that was going to be lost to the black hole. So my presentation today is about non-print legal deposit, avoiding that black hole. So where have we come from? So I'm going to talk to you about the point from regulations to the review, because we're going to be reviewing those regulations. I don't need to point it anywhere, do I? I can just...
Yeah, anyway.
So, where have we come from? So the Legal Deposit Act in 2003 included the term non-print works. So there was a requirement to include non-print works, which kind of gave the Secretary of State the powers to make regulations regarding the inclusion of making publishers deposit non-print works. But it took 10 years of hard negotiations to get to the actual regulations. Now, the world changed quite considerably in those 10 years. I mean, we won the World Cup, the Rugby World Cup, that is. We were rich. But things like iPads, e-books, it changed considerably. You know, a third of the population had access to the internet. So we were in a completely different place in 2013 than we were in 2003. Austerity kicks in, which means that the public sector who are going to be implementing these regulations aren't as rich as they were originally. And the key point is user expectations. In those 10 years, the expectation on users, especially in academic libraries, is instant. They can have everything straight away, they don't need to wait for it, and it can run perfectly, and they can search like Google. You know the users we're talking about. So 2003 was a turning point in content creation. Eric Schmidt from Google said every 2 days we create as much content as from the dawn of man up to the year 2003. So from dawn of man to 2003 is the same amount of content as we produced since Monday. It's huge, it's an explosion, and because of the vastness, it's complex and it makes things difficult. The sheer amount of digital information out there makes at a higher risk that things are going to fall into this black hole. But the non-print legal deposit regulations came about in order to try and prevent that. So our aim is to try and collect as much information as possible in a usable way and preserve it for our future generations. So we want to be able to access it now, but we also need to think about those researchers in 100 years' time who are wanting to do the equivalent of picking up manuscripts now. So what have we achieved so far? I mean, legal deposit in print has been around for 400 years. We're still having problems. You know, it's still difficult to collect material, it's still difficult to process material. But in just 3 years, we have managed to collect content that is such diverse formats, and it's a huge amount. I mean, the content, you can imagine, your publishers, you can imagine that around this table, no two content streams would look the same. Your metadata probably is standardised, but there will be differences. It is really complex. So, have we got to this? So, the digital library. Well, not quite. So, for those of you who are Star Wars fans, you might recognise that as the Jedi archives. And any of those who are old-fashioned like me will recognise this as the Trinity College Dublin Long Room. Have we moved from that to that? No, not quite. What we have achieved is we've now collecting metadata from over 400 publishers. We've now can get the content out to all 6 libraries. We have a central infrastructure, which I'll explain in a moment. So we've achieved the metadata, we've achieved the access, and we've achieved the printing for simple content. So that's ebooks, e-journals, websites. But that isn't where publishing ends. We've got more complex formats to come, and I'll talk about that in a moment. For the metadata, what we do, and I'm sure that Hugh's presentation will tell you a little bit more about this and explain here. When the content comes in, we have a lovely PDF or an EPUB, and we ingest it into a server here in Boston Spa. And in order to make sure that we've always got copies of that, we replicate it 4 times. So we have a node up in Scotland, a node down in Wales, and a node in St Pancras. So it's replicated on 4 nodes. If when we come to search for an article and it's corrupt, we will replace it with one from another node. The libraries based on these sites can access the node that's directly there. The other libraries, so Trinity College, Cambridge and Oxford, connect to one of the existing nodes in a secure network to harvest their content. And it's all on single access points. So what we have is single concurrent users. So only one user per site can access the content. Pretty much like the print world. It replicates the print world. If each of these libraries had one print copy, they could only one user at a time would be able to access it. It's the same. See beautiful libraries. You see, I've got the best job. I get to work in such beautiful locations. So we have a lovely Bodleian, Cambridge University, and this modern-looking one is actually a building. It's actually Trinity College Dublin, and it's not modern at all. So far, we have achieved an enormous amount in such a short time. I mean, the DLS, the digital library system within the British Library, started being built the moment that the 2003 Act said we needed non-print works. At that point, the British Library started invested millions to create a system that could store this content securely. To date, we have 98,000 ebooks, 147 terabytes of archived web. Now, that's a huge amount of material, and 2 million e-journal articles. If you think about when we ingest print material, we'll have a journal which might have 14 articles in, but we accession that once, we catalogue it once. We've got about 14 articles per journal, so we've got 14 times as much processing to do. Some of it can be automated. Providing metadata is great. If you provide great metadata, lots of things can be automated. The other great thing about this is that publishers are finding it easier to deposit electronically, and we're getting a lot more content than we were. So we're getting more content from the same publishers. We're also getting content that was only digital. So of course, any content that was digital only we had to not take until the regulations came in. We're now getting that. And in some cases, we're getting 40% more content than we were because the process is more efficient. The thing that's next, we class that as phase one. It's 80% of the content, that normal content. We've now got to start focusing on the more complex content, so non-standard formats. So born digital maps, and they're so complex, they come in lots of layers, lots of different formats. But we have a platform that we can create, born digital sheet music and emerging formats. Now, digital mapping is fascinating. We have a platform already which copes with ordnance survey maps. We're developing that platform to cope with other maps because at the moment we're only collecting about 10% of the known universe. The new system can cope with standard formats. Next week there might be a new mapping format and we will have to change and adapt. Born digital sheet music is even more complex, and that's because the publishers haven't got any consistent platforms yet. They are producing material in different formats. They don't have, they haven't even got the concept of providing metadata. When we've been talking to the publishers, we've had to explain to them what metadata is. The other thing is musicologists come into a library. What do they do with music? They don't just sit there and read it. Quite often they'll want to take it to a practice room. Obviously in the British Library we don't have a grand piano somewhere in the hallway that they can go to, but places like Oxford and Cambridge have a music library with a practice room attached to it. So how do we do that securely? How do we present music in a format that they can borrow for the day and it's secure and come back and bring it, you know, borrow it within the library premises? So we've got lots of things to think about there. Emerging formats is huge. I mean, we have the, to use a Bushism, we have a known universe and we have an unknown. So we have the known knowns and the unknown knowns. We can look at emerging formats today, things like touch press, things like the Lloyd's Register. We've always had Lloyd's Register in a print copy. We want to have that within the library. Now it's a database, it's very different. How do we manage that? And we don't want these publications to completely fall into the black hole. Lots of them are transient. I mean, touch press is a great example of really dynamic content. Is that the future? Is touch press just the start? And we want to understand culturally, is that the start of something new? As an institution that's collecting material for future generations to do research, we need to understand where that particular stream of content has started. You know, books, printed books started as individual manuscripts. At what point did they start being collated into a book? We've got that history here. We want the similar history that's representing in the digital world. But it's often transient. Like the Betamax and VHS videos, how do we know which ones are going to be staying? How do we know which formats are the ones to be collecting? So we can't collect everything, but we have to collect samples of as much as we can. When in 2011 the government passed a law that said that every new regulation that is passed will need to be reviewed within 5 years. So our regulation for the non-print legal deposit is due to be reviewed by March 2018. So we're currently working towards a review. That means that we need to prove whether regulations work both for industry and for the libraries. There are certain things which the publishers might want to change about the regulations. There are certain things the libraries want to change. You know, a good example would be web access. Web is available outside this library open web. The web archive isn't. You have to be within a library reading room. You have to read it one page at a time. If you're used to working with the web and doing your research from the web like a social scientist, your chances are that you don't want to have to come into a reading room library. It's not being used for that purpose, so is there something we can do to make it secure, that it's usable for researchers? Otherwise, you may as well just put this in a cardboard box and hide it underneath the desk. So at the moment we're collecting things like usage stats, identifying problem areas such as if a publisher produces content and then suddenly decides to change the way it provides its metadata, that changes all our workflows and makes it difficult. We have to recreate a transform. And for a library who's doing this for every type of publication, that's huge. So, you know, we need to understand protocols and warnings about changes would be helpful. And all of this will be reviewed in the regulations. So we've come a long way. I think we can celebrate where we have come from and how the regulations have been implemented so far. We have a lot to do. We have to plan for that future. We have to plan for the future that we know will happen. We know that digital sheet music is coming on board. We know digital newspapers are here. The Independent has gone digital. How do we collect that? It's very different. It's in an app. It's not like a PDF or an EPUB. We've got these challenges here and now, but we also have to be thinking about what will the challenges be in 5 and 10 years. So we haven't reached that Jedi archive, whether we will. But in keeping with the Star Wars theme and space theme for the black holes, any questions I'm happy to take. Oh, sorry, I haven't
I have a question. How much of the kind of early period of e-books has been collected? I'm thinking that period between 1998 and about 2006, when there was lots of different formats like Rocketbook and Palm Pilot, Peanut Reader type books. Has that essentially disappeared already?
Essentially, yes. I mean, Andy, we've got some voluntary deposits, but it's, again, that was just standard. We had some voluntary deposits from about 2006, did they start?
Well, yeah, earlier than that, but it was mainly journal
PDFs.
content. Regulations came in 2013 and we could collect digitally from that point forward, not retrospectively. So yeah, Graham, you're right, it's gone.
Yeah, and it's less than 10 years old. I think that illustrates the problem for you, that these things disappear really, really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some publishers have been great when they've started the deposit and they've given us back content, which is a huge amount of work for us to do, because it spans many years. I mean, some of the Sage publications, the earliest we got was 1938, but that's digitised content. It's flat. It's not this new type of content that was coming on PDAs, etc.
I think that's also interesting in the sense that what we were getting at the beginning was fundamentally different to what we're getting now, and now we think we're more mature. In 10 years' time, it could well be fundamentally different to what we receive today. So the sort of perception of maturity, we think we're more mature, we think we've got more embedded standards, we think, but in reality it'd be very interesting to look back in 2026 at what we were getting in 2016 to see how different it is. But it probably hasn't got the same rate of exponential change that you were getting in the very early days as things formed. But I think, there's probably a lot more change than we anticipate. Moving forward, and we try to identify some, but a lot of this is sort of, this unknown unknowns. It's something like that in these emerging formats, and to what extent will publications move into more dynamic forms? How can we then capture them? To what extent are they databases or apps rather than publications or whatever? So there's a certain element of future gazing. We can't afford to build the capture technology in advance of that, so we have to react to it to a certain extent. And that's what makes it interesting.
I think we've also got the fact that we're often seeing the same stuff coming up again and again and again in different variations of the same formats. So in terms of the republication, the repackaging, the granularisation.
Just like hardback and paperback.
Yes. And hybridisation between the journal world and the book world, in the sense of articles in journals being packaged together as books in quotes, and chapters coming out as individual things, and then coming out as endless variants of different format flavors of PDF or other variants. And of course wrappers, in terms of the other different forms.
Yeah, EPUB 3 with embedded video and audio now is the discussions can we cope with those? So the whole testing process then has to kick in. Can we render it effectively? The reading room view of legal deposit digital content
That's true.
I think the other thing that we have a challenge around is, if you go back to those early days, is how do we meet the challenge of very long-term digital preservation? So how can we show these things in the future, in 20, 50, 100 years' time? And that's either through migration of formats, so you get the latest viewer for that format as it's migrated over time, or it's some sort of emulation to try and emulate the user experience of 2016 in 2056.
Turn the heating down.
Pardon?
Turn the heating down.
Yeah.
Austerity back down.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So also not just about capturing it, but also understanding how would you preserve that.
Visions of this sort of series of nested virtual machines.
Yeah.
Each one running another virtual machine of something slightly smaller.
Yes.
Yeah.
Taking updates.
Yes.
So I think probably the main strategy would be to migrate data across time for those that are interested in the sort of intellectual content. I want to know what this article was about in 2016. But other researchers might want to know, I want to know what it was like to access this content in 2016, and how did it look, and what was the look and feel of the thing.
I think it was also the thing that, in the old days when we had print legal deposit, and we used to ask the best copy, and usually that meant a hardback, because it would last longer in a library context and all those. The idea of going for what might be the best of a number of available versions from a publisher at this point in time, it was very much into something in the eye of the beholder. That user experience situation can occur.
The SOUP didn't want to give me the gold leaf version of Peter Pan.
Can I ask where the line is drawn? Are you collecting everything that's published in the UK, or everything that's published by a UK publisher? Or?
Now that's really interesting. So legally, so legally, everything that is published in the UK or solely distributed within the UK is liable for deposit. We're finding that some of the publishers are finding it difficult to differentiate between that. So they're just saying, do you know what? I may as well give you the whole feed, because if I give you the whole feed, then I'm not missing anything. And it doesn't cost extra to them to give us the whole feed. It would cost more for them to separate it out to 2 feeds. So it depends on the publisher's take on it.
Well, if I understand you correctly, a Canadian publisher that makes ebooks available in the UK has to submit.
If there is Andy's best to answer this question, but I think if it's if there's a sole distribution, so if there's a sole distribution...
Yeah, you can't really apply a sole distribution to a digital product. It's fine in the print world.
But how does that work in,
yes. It's very much in the early stages, and publishers approach it differently. Big global players, some of them will say this is not published in the UK, and therefore I'm not sending it. It's only available to a US audience. Okay. Others will say, here's our global output.
I think there is, and I'm not sure the exact wording, but within the 2013 regulations, this issue of territoriality does come up, and there are some definitions around significant or evidence of significant editorial input within the country. So is there, this thing's produced in Canada, the editorial control is wholly in Canada. All these things are available worldwide in some sense, but actually may not be liable for UK regulations. Is it published under a website with a .co.uk or the .uk suffix? Yeah. So there are certain guiding rules as to whether something is a UK publication in a digital publishing sense, but it certainly is not as clear cut as it was in the nice world of book publishing, when evidence of distribution and things.
Legal deposit is very much based on goodwill. It's carrot, there's no real stick. So
but you could be inundated with a lot of publications and immediately targeted.
And it is noticeable that feeds we've been getting in have got the majority of materials coming with the global code on it. Rather than saying a specific UK code, you may see the original Australia, India, America codes, but most of them are coming with global. And again, tying with what Linda was saying, much of the material, again, another 60%, which may well be backfire republication, effectively. This is not contemporary publication, contemporaneous publication. It is older material that's being republished and brought on screen by a publisher. again.
If you've already received and catalogued a hardback in 1990, do you want the digital version?
We are asking them, yes.
If I understand it correctly, anything that's available via Amazon.co.uk, you would want.
And stuff that's not available via Amazon.co.uk. So.
The retailers are available.
Yeah, that's very clear.
I definitely want to have the Amazon discussion.
There's also an awful lot of legal deposit is in that world of grey literature.
Yeah.
Government publications, society publishing, Royal College of Books. There's a lot of material coming in through legal deposit, but it isn't in the commercial mainstream area.
Can I just say, on the website, I'm sure it says if you've already deposited.
That's right. If you've sent a book, you've no obligation to send the digital equivalent.
So you'd like it, but there's no obligation.
It just helps for preservation, you know. If we don't have to pull up the paper copy from the stores, and all we need to do is produce the electronic copy, it saves that printed copy.
Published in the 1960s, that's the
So it's again very useful if the Onyx for the e-book contains the print.
Yes. Related product is your friend.
Yes. It is.
How far does this extend to ephemera? Things like posters, marketing material, that sort of thing.
The reality is that if it's on a website, we would crawl it.
Yes, for digital. In the world of print, we have some rules around retention of ephemera. Some things are in, some things are out. In a digital world, a lot of that ephemera, you're right, would come through the domain, just like the web crawls and it would capture it. And I think to a certain extent, I think we touched on this a few minutes ago, we want to minimise any burden on publishers. And it's often easier, I think in your conversations, Andy, where the publishers say, it's just easier for me to send this feed. We don't want to have to go into this feed, extract A, B and C, but send D, E and F.
Yeah.
It's actually easier to send a lot. And the access is very constrained under legal deposit, very well controlled. And actually, I think if ephemera then arrive, if ephemera isn't published as part of that, we will get it.
We wouldn't necessarily put that, we wouldn't necessarily put that in the national bibliography versions of the records which we distribute, because we have quite a clear exclusions policy on that. But now that we are putting e-books in the international bibliography, then again, contemporary e-books would be going into that. I should also say, again, also make a plug for advanced publication information, or CIP information about e-books as well, because that then feeds into the various other different activities that we undertake then in terms of enhancing, say, the Onyx original data, and passing that through both the catalogues and the national bibliography services. And also because it helps us with the public lending right activity, which also is now e-book based as well as audio book based. So in terms of lends that take place, now that the PR is part of the British Library, lends that take place in the public library system, it helps us track those, and for authors and illustrators and narrators to get their dues, as it were, from the fund.
So is there a sort of cross-collaboration with other countries, say the Library of Congress, or the other countries who are doing a similar legal deposit? So if HarperCollins in the States were to deposit a copy in America of a book that we're co-publishing or something, we wouldn't necessarily have to submit that again, or would we?
Would.
There's no collaboration. I mean, it would be ideal if we could have a collaboration with some of the European libraries, but we don't. So we're quite distinct. So we have to have our own feed, and you would have to deposit it here as well.
The biggest collaboration in that sense is usually the sharing of metadata and the work towards using common standards. So how we are interoperable with other international and European libraries.
Should we pass over to Huw?
Thank you.
Thank you.
One Huw, tell us how it is.
I'm scared now. It sounds so complicated. I'm actually worried about Sorry. Sheet music. I don't even publish sheet music. I'm worried about how do you
how we are.
Good grief. I was looking through it, and it is a big operation, but I didn't realise the kind of things you have to think about in terms of basically everything. Yeah, it's frightening. So I tried to concentrate on simplicity rather than the complexity. I tried to avoid that. So I'm just going to talk through how Sage moved across from print delivery of deposit, legal deposit, to the digital side, and how simple it has been, and hopefully give everyone hope. Is everyone doing digital delivery in the room? Am I speaking to the converted? No, okay. It's great.
We'll pay you later.
Yeah, that's great. I'm done. There we go. I want to say it was kind of an honour to be invited here, but it wasn't so much an invitation as a you are coming. Andy was saying just now that there's no carrot and a stick, but I just want to read out the email that Andy sent to me. I need you to get out of bed early on October 26th, if possible. Cruel. I volunteered you for a 20-minute slot at the BIC Breakfast that we're hosting to talk about the transition from print to digital. Bacon sandwiches as an incentive. I guess that was the carrot. So I didn't really have much choice, but it was actually a pleasure. And it was actually quite interesting to investigate. Now I look after doing digital deposit for Sage. I didn't really know that much about it, and so it just goes to show how simple it has been to implement and how little I think about it now. So I've got 20 minutes, which seems an awful lot for me to talk about legal deposit, but we're going to have a go. So we're going to start right at the beginning. As we've got 20 minutes, we can go back 400 years. The chap on the right-hand side there is Thomas Bodley, Sir Thomas Bodley. He was around in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. His title was Gentleman Usher, which I think is rather wonderful. I don't quite know what he did, but I'm thinking of including it on my business card. He founded the Bodleian Library in 1600. He was a scholar. He went to Oxford to study. He was actually a professor there as well. And in 1600 he decided, let's found a library there. He got all his friends together to populate that library. So without very great store of honourable friends to further the design, it could have proved a vain attempt. I like the way he adds e's on everything. It's like now we all have books and e-books. He started a trend. It caught on, and by 1662, been slightly cut off here. It's not 662, we're not going back quite that far, not quite that old. It was enacted in law that legal deposit copies had to be provided by publishers. As you've seen from Linda's talk, there are 6, Bodleian at Oxford, National Library here, Cambridge, National Library of Scotland, National Library of Wales, and Trinity College Dublin. I still haven't quite worked out why it is Trinity College Dublin. That will be my question later. But it is, so we'll take that as written. So from 1662, this has been the process. It's been a very manual process for publishers and for the libraries involved. We've been sending books to the British Library, they've been distributed and then been processed by each library, shelved, all that kind of thing. This was the process of Sage in 2015. Nothing really has changed in 400 years. It's still a labour-intensive process, or it was until the new changes enacted in 2013 for the provision of digital copies. I went to our distribution manager and said, have you got any information about our legal deposits over the years? Expecting pretty much a blank slide. Fortunately, we have. We have data going back to 2001. So the last 15 years of this is Sage sending books to the British Library and the other constituent libraries. So 15 years, we sent 81,930 books across, which have a value of over £6 million. And if you lined them all up, spine to spine, like on a shelf, there would be 1.3 miles of books. It's quite a lot of work, quite a lot of money. I'm not saying that's the cost to us, it's just the value of those books that we've sent out. To put that in context, I thought we'd look at some London landmarks. So for the 1.3 miles, I was going to say million miles, and 1.3 miles of books that we sent across in the last 15 years, is the equivalent of 5 trips around the London Eye, 7 versions of the Shard on top of each other, 40 of the Nelson's Column, and 1,138 Benedict Cumberbatches one on top of each other. This is important facts. This is probably the only thing I remember. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of shelf space, and a lot of time involved. Now this is one of the favourite graphs I've actually produced at Sage. I've been at Sage for almost all of those 14 years, or 15 years. I've been there just shy of 14. Sage usually like graphs that go up, revenue graphs, things like that. This is a graph of all the books that we've sent through over the last 15 years. So 2,736 in 2001. Our peak was 2008 with just over 8,000. In 2016, we sent 0, which is quite happy-making in terms of the amount of effort that we're making and time-consuming that sending legal deposit copies out. The drop, precipitous drop, in 2015 is when we implemented completely digital delivery in, I think it was the beginning of Q2 2015. So I'm just going to talk through some of the pros and cons of moving across from print to digital. I actually mentioned that I was doing this talk to one of my colleagues who used to work for a publisher in Ireland. She didn't know why they sent it to Trinity either. She actually had like tears of joy on her face when I was saying that we could now do this. She didn't realise that we were doing it. We can now do this in digital form rather than print, because she was telling me apparently Ireland is quite dark and rainy, and she remembers many mornings going to the post office carrying books. It was her job. It was her first job in publishing, carrying those books. She's quite tiny. And delivering them and sending them off, and then 2 months later hearing that they hadn't arrived and having to do it all again and doing it for all the books. So when I told her that you can just press a button and it's all done, she was visibly moved, which is quite a nice feeling. Shelf space. You talked about a bit about shelf space earlier. This is mainly a benefit to the libraries involved. I know the Boston Spa operation is a huge space, and there's a huge space in all the libraries, but there's only a finite amount of space available, so the actual benefits to the libraries themselves are huge in terms of cost savings in that respect, and also, as we've touched on as well, the amount of access that can be afforded to patrons, rather than a patron requesting a book, they can get immediate access, or it does speed up the access for the library users. The environment, I didn't find this, didn't know this beforehand, but 20% of carbon emissions in the UK are made up of road haulage. I'm not blaming all publishers and the British Library for raising temperatures, climate change and all that for the UK, but it does make a contribution. So anything that actually lowers the amount of print copies being distributed on our roads around the country does make a positive impact. So it needs to be taken into consideration. I've mentioned this before, but the time aspect, there is a lot of time involved in packing up books, sending off books, the processing time for the libraries, the redistribution to the satellite libraries around the country. With digital distribution, that time is completely saved. And you can be doing something else more important, like worrying about how to do sheet music and the issues of different formats in the future. And there are more important things to think about than packing up books and sending them around the country. For Sage, the original process, which is, as I said, hasn't changed for many, many years until recently, involved a number of departments. It involved our warehouse staff up in Peterborough. It involved distribution management in our office in Old Street. It involved a finance department, a customer services department. It was all managed by a rights department, which I'm not quite sure. I'm quite sure why that was the case. I think it was just a leftover from many years of people wondering what to do with it. But 5 departments across the company were involved. They're all not involved anymore. They're doing other things, more relevant things to them, and the whole process is managed by one person, being me. The main idea for moving across from print to digital is mainly less traction, less physical endangerment of being crushed by a load of books, and more relaxation. Now, this isn't a scale image of me, and I am less blue, but this is how I feel about digital distribution of legal deposit copies. It just happens in the background. I'll just take you through how we implemented that at Sage. Firstly, I'll talk about cons. This will be brief because there aren't any. I'm quite cynical sometimes. Some people in the company might suggest, but I couldn't find a single thing wrong with doing digital deposit copies. It's just saved us a huge amount of time, a huge amount of money, and nobody really even knows that it's happening, which is quite a wonderful thing. If anyone has any questions about possible cons, I'd be more than happy to talk about them, but I couldn't find any at the moment.
Good question. Are you able to have 0 books delivered because everything you publish also has an e-edition?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we're a lot simpler, I think, than a lot of other publishers. So we're probably not the perfect example. Perhaps we are the perfect example in the fact that we do have that electronic copy. But we are quite simple in that we have books, we have journals, we have our own databases, but all of that is manageable within the digital process. Now this slide is slightly outdated. I looked at it yesterday after I'd sent the slides through. It was trying to emphasise that it was just a push of a button that we could actually deliver all this content. But to be honest with you, the truth is that I don't even push a button. It's even more simple than that. It just happens. We work with Ingram. CoreSource is their digital asset management platform. I know probably a lot of publishers here are using them as well. We use them to distribute all our ebooks to all vendors, whoever it may be, library vendors, Amazon, Google, those kind of people. But they also allow us to deliver through to the British Library. And this was the change that we initiated in 2015. The law came into 2013. We were a little bit slow about adopting, but we spoke with Andy about it on various times, and we decided to implement it. The implementation process, I think, took at the most about a month. I'm not even sure it was that long. CoreSource set up for a distribution channel is a matter of days. We manage Sage published through, going back to an earlier point about what kind of content to send. Sage publishing offices in the US, in Los Angeles, here in London, and in New Delhi in India. We send everything. It's just simpler to work out. All that content is sold into the UK. It may be originally published in a different country. It's just simpler for us not to work out, oh, should we send this, shouldn't we? Just send everything. With the digital approach, it's not costing any extra, and it's worthwhile to have that content in the libraries. CoreSource also allows us flexibility. We can actually have a manual approach whereby the books come into the CoreSource system and we can manually send them out to the British Library, or we can just tick a box and automate the whole process, which is quite a nice place to be. What happens is the books are coming in from our production department or from typesetters. They're loading it directly into CoreSource, and it's being automatically distributed once a day out to the British Library. I get an email from CoreSource saying, in this instance, 6 titles were successfully processed. If any problems have happened, it will say 6 titles and 1 failed, and then I can go in and look to see why that failed. In general, though, there aren't that many failures. It's quite a simple system. All it's doing, in essence, is sending the content from Sage to the FTP site at the British Library. It's as simple as that. CoreSource makes it simpler for us, because we're using them already, but it doesn't mean that if you're not a CoreSource user, that you're excluded from this process. The British Library have Publisher Deposit website set up that you can register for, which I believe is free, and it's their FTP, and you can deliver content directly to there. We deliver, by the way, EPUB 2 content for all our books. Now, I work mainly on the books side of things and have done during my time at Sage. I don't really know what a print book looks like anymore, because I tend to just work with ISBNs, and it's moving ISBNs around, which is kind of not quite as romantic as I used to think, because I started stocking books early, and I used to like print books. So I am aware of the other aspects that we do at Sage. The term is digital harvesting, hence the terrible picture. Our journal content is on Sage Journals platform. We also have various databases, Sage Research Methods Online, case studies, things like that. The British Library are granted access to that content, and they can pull that content down, as we've discussed with websites before. So that's a simple approach, and that goes along in the background as well. All in all, it's a probably win situation for us, in terms of we're saving that huge amounts of money. We reckoned £6 million over the last 15 years in value, but if you're going to look at how much it's saving us in costs per year, it's around £45,000 to £50,000 a year, which is a pleasant amount of money to keep retain, rather than sending it out in postage bills and things like that. It has been a remarkably easy process. As I say, it was about a month of implementation and testing to make sure that the content was going through correctly. And it's taken away the inaccuracies of humans, basically. What was happening previously is that it depended on someone remembering to do it. We're all fallible, it does get forgotten. And it speeded up the process as well. Our content is being sent out to the libraries about 2 to 3 weeks, in some cases a couple of months before publication, whereas before it would be at least 3 to 4 weeks after publication, when the print copy would actually be sent out. So that content is with the library quicker, and hopefully with users of the library earlier. To kick off, or to finish off, sorry, we'll return to Sir Thomas Bodley. I think he would appreciate what the kind of the progress that's been made over the last 400 years if he actually understood what ebooks were and EPUB2 and digital asset management. He probably wouldn't want to know. He would probably applaud it and raise a glass. It has been a big stride forward in terms of digital delivery, and I very much hope it continues. It saved us a lot of time. It has been a very quick and easy implementation, and I think Sir Thomas would approve that his early work in promoting the delivery of content from his friends, he would like that his friends in publishing can work together with British Library going forward in delivering that content in the form that it is currently and in the forms that it will take in the future, and we can continue to work on developing that. Any questions? Stone silence.
I'm just really pleased that you see the swan on the top and not those feet going mad.
Yes, yeah. For us, I think for publishers, it's created, it's made it so much simpler and easier and cost effective. Whether it's made it easier for libraries, it's probably made it more complicated. But I think it's probably made it better in the amount of content. Yeah, you're saying that you've got 40% more content from some publishers. That can be only beneficial to the users of the library and the library itself. But yeah, I think the publishers have got the easy part, to be honest. It's made our lives a lot simpler.
Has digital allowed you to publish material that wouldn't have appeared in a book form?
Definitely, yes. We're looking to do open access content with our books as well, but there has been a lot more content that we've been able to include with things like case studies. We're doing a lot more video content now. So yeah, it's opened up a lot of doors. Whereas it used to be the odd companion website for our textbooks and things like that, we can produce a lot more value-added content to our books, assessment and things like that can be included. So the book is just the kind of gateway to extra content, to the journal content. As was said earlier, we've got journal content going back into the 30s. I think actually some of it goes back even further. I can't remember how many articles we have on our topic, but it's in millions. So we can use that to improve the content that we're providing. So a textbook can have the relevant history of journal articles going through to help the students. So it really has opened up the type of content that we can deliver and deliver it to them quicker and in a form that they actually want. And give them the choice. Actually, it's about choice. We've seen actually a resurgence this year in print. People still like print. That kind of death of print that was talked about so much a few years ago with the kind of advent of ebooks. It never happened. I think it affects different publishers in different ways. Trade publishers perhaps more than academic. But for Sage, 20% of our sales are digital and 80% of our print sales, our book sales are print. So you can see that it hasn't quite happened quite as quickly as necessary. But it is about choice in terms of what does the student actually want from us, what does the library user want from us. Print has traditional benefits, but digital, especially for an academic publisher, it does have really great benefits in terms of discoverability, search, note-taking, highlighting, things like that. So they both complement each other, I think. So you won't see print going away anytime soon, but digital does give us a lot more opportunities, especially on the assessment and video side, the interactivity.
Mm-hmm. So one of the big benefits of EPUB 3 is that you can have much more interactivity within an ebook. without having to rely on resources outside of the book itself. If you download the book, you could get everything for, a quiz, interactive assessment, all sorts of things. Almost anything you can do on a website could be done within a book.
Helen?
I was just wondering, what do you see as the purpose of Deposit?
As the purpose? The answer to that on the website was it's for the national heritage. I can go along with that.
Because you were saying your databases as well, you're crawling the information in the databases as well. If people can come in the library and look at your database, how do you feel about people buying your databases, and is it of absolutely no consequence?
Because it's one user access. It's more about discoverability and having that access. I think that's more beneficial to us, that someone can go into the British Library and say, oh, I can get that Sage content, and then go back to their library, wherever it may be, and say, actually, I used that at the British Library, that was good. So it's kind of advertising almost. And yeah, it's also beneficial in the fact that there have been instances where, especially with accessible content for, say, the visually impaired, where a book from, say, 1990 hasn't been, we haven't had a copy of it, then the British Library have actually had the copy, so we've actually been able to get a copy and digitise it ourselves, and then we can supply that back to the British Library. So it's kind of reciprocation there. So I think it's just acting as an archive. And when we started off our ebook programme, I was finding PDFs basically down the back of the sofa. It was all over the place, and we've managed to archive that. It's taken us nearly 10 years to archive all of our content from all of our different offices somewhere central. But if our servers suddenly went down, we know that there would be another copy. We've got another copy of Core Source, we've got another copy of the British Library. I think the kind of legal deposit could act as, there's a lot of talk within publishers in recent years about what happens when someone goes bust, or an aggregator goes bust, like Sweats when caused a lot of problems recently. I think that was the cause of people asking the questions, and there are deep archives available, but not all content is there. So I definitely think there's a role for legal deposit to play in what happens with when an aggregator perhaps gets into difficulty in the future, because it might happen, and making sure that the customers do have access to that content.
So we have actually been asked by different publishers at different times to supply metadata back to them when they have either acquired infants, wanted to know about their own publishing record, which they've lost themselves, when they're looking at republishing the books, including other copyright material. And we can do that as a obviously based only on what's been deposited with us.
It's another part of the sort of locks and clocks type of strategy where lots of copies keep things safe. The legal deposit libraries, normal libraries, whether academic or public, the publisher's own archive, the digital asset distributors, the more copies that are out there, the safer your content is in the long term. Because any single one of those could be lost at any time.
Well, you might say, though, that each of those people has to provide security. So
each of those people does provide security.
As well as the back.
Yeah, each of those does provide security in its own way. So locks and clocks have a dark archive. The digital legal deposit is single copy access, so it's the same as having one book in a library.
No, what I'm talking about is in a world where hackers prevail.
Sure.
You actually increasing your risk at the same time as backup in that sense. With safeness also necessary.
Yeah, you decrease your exposure. I think one has to trust that the libraries can maintain fairly secure access to these things. They're closed systems, much less exposed to the internet than you might imagine. But that's fundamentally your job, isn't it? It is a duty of the library to keep these things secure.
Yes, and not use them for any other purpose than the legal deposit as described in the Act. So if we need to do anything for our Parental Lending Act, we do buy a separate copy for that, and run that for a separate collection. So the digital copy is kept solely for use in the, under the terms which are in the Act. And I mean, security from us, I think, comes from a slightly different perspective in the sense of the kind of thing that Linda was talking about earlier in terms of replication
it's inward looking, isn't it?
Yeah, in the sense of making sure that in 500 years' time, in theory, you can still read the file. And we have seen the evidence already, I think, of bit rot over years in different ways, and have successfully recovered from that kind of thing. But I think the mechanisms we put in place to enable people only to get access within the region or bolted things down to such an extent that it would be, even if you got through the kind of firewalls and things, it would be even harder to deal with the kind of issues that we have put in place to prevent people from multi-user access within the region themselves. So,
well, I wasn't thinking of the reading, but I was thinking of your servers. You must have vast servers actually in the building. You keep PDFs somewhere.
Well, I mean, yes, in terms of the striped across the different server arrays, yeah.
I mean, of course.
Yes, so we have a data security policy with penetration testing and performance for all of those things. But absolutely.
And there's only then you're saying in this course source I've got loads of have all got it as well, and then somebody else has got it as well. It just begins to be, oh, that's exposing yourself on a lot of fronts. I mean, in the sense of, if anybody was trying to make
certainly exposing yourself, but yeah, the online retailers are probably the least secure of all of the places. The people like Locks and Clocks, people like the National Libraries have full-time security staff. If I were in your position, I'd worry more about online retailers.
Oh, I'm not worried at all. I'm just thinking of it as in saying you've got more copies out there makes you more safe. That isn't strictly speaking.
I think another interesting point is that when you've got things stored in a dark archive, you're never accessing them, so you can never tell whether they're truly preserved. Whereas when they're being accessed, you've got that feedback loop to know whether they're preserved or not.
Can I ask a question which is not quite related, but it just came up earlier? I was wondering, where has the pressure come from to preserve the experience of the archive, which you just mentioned it earlier?
So digital scholarship, really. So this is around the nature of research within social science and humanities, about looking back not just at the intellectual content of a book or an article, but also, this is almost, I suppose, the same thing in the print world, of people looking at book bindings and people looking at the way that things were published historically over time, but actually there is a body of research which will look back at what was the user experience for published works in 2016. What did it look like? What sort of experiences were people getting? What were the interfaces like? It's a sort of computing history, and so it's that sort of digital scholarship that people may want to look at. So they're not just wanting to know what the text was, but they're wanting to know what the experience was 50 years ago or whatever. So it tends to be in the spaces of social science and humanities research.
Is that going to be important enough for you to have to sacrifice vast sums of money to preserve?
Well, that's the question that we answer. I think that's why I was saying I think most of our content will be preserved through migration, which is moving on to the next version of WordPerfect to Word to whatever, WordStar to whatever, and it will be a migration policy. But there may be certain types of publication or experiences. Computer games would be a good example, although we don't collect computer games. But that would be a good example of what we do. You want to play the computer game in the sense of what it was like playing it in 2016. So I think we would target emulation very understanding the cost of doing it. So I think that would be the lesson.
I think you should palm off to someone who thinks it's important.
Yeah,
some
absolutely.
social sciences institutions.
Yes, yeah. So that would be certainly migration would be the major preservation.
That's quite an interesting point. Something that we were talking about in the last digital supply chain meeting is this: as publishers move on from that sort of first initial boast of digital publishing, we've now got larger back catalogues where the content is still relevant, but it's maybe 5 years old, and we're finding now that retailers are rejecting, if they find gaps in the catalogue, they'll reject a file that's 5 years old that we push out to them because it no longer complies with the latest version of ePubCheck.
Right.
But it would have complied with the version of ePubCheck at the time that it was first published. And so there is a bit of a dilemma for us in that it's still valuable for us to have that book on sale to sell, but it's not worth the investment investment
reformat it.
of reformatting it. And it's not something you can just continuously do either. You can't just continuously like so it's I think it's a kind of problem that we're kind of facing in terms of what our retailer expectations are.
Yes.
And I don't have a solution at the moment.
No, it's and again there are certain, when you would migrate because files became unreadable in the original formats, but rather than undesirable. So you can have multiple files working at the same time, but a very long-term data migration strategy that in 50 or 100 years' time, these things will be like trying to read some of these very early formats that Ray was talking about earlier.
I think a good example of where the content structure and the whole image and how it's displayed would be important is newspapers, because you've got the editorial putting together of that newspaper. Now, we could probably render a digital newspaper in 100 years' time by individual articles, but actually how the public will take on board that information will be based on what editorial content is pushed to the front of the newspaper. So if you've got a digital representation, how easy is it to get to that article about Max Clifford? Therefore, that's why it was never brought to the press. So it's information like that that is useful to preserve, because when you're looking at history in 50 years' time and you wonder, well, this thing really kicked off then, and it was in the news, so how come nobody heard about it? Well, they didn't hear about it because it was effectively 5 clicks away rather than immediately present.
I will cut off the discussion there, sorry, just because we're overrunning time-wise. If anyone has any questions or anything after the event, then please do hang around. I'm sure our speakers won't mind at all. But thank you all very much for coming to this BIC Breakfast. I hope you found it really interesting. Just to say, all of the information that I gave to you at the beginning of my presentation is included in our What's Happening email, which is a monthly newsletter. So if you would like to receive that and don't already receive it, then do talk to me and I'll certainly add you to the mailing list. Please can you all help me thank our speakers for their fantastic presentations.
I have one question to ask, if you don't mind. That's how does the digital legal deposit